Have you ever been kind of lost and needed to find answers to something? Or maybe you just feel confused and you need some guidance, right? Some kind of answer from something outside of yourself. Well, in this video, I want to talk about what's known as pendulum dowsing, or using a pendulum to get answers. So this is a pendulum. I'm just going to try and get the camera to focus on this now. Maybe if I move out of the way. This is a pendulum. This is a crystal pendulum. I think it's an amethyst one. And it's obviously on a chain. So what you do with, and I'll get into this in a second, but you basically swing the pendulum in a certain way, or let the pendulum swing on its own, and you will receive answers depending on the direction and the pattern that it swings in. So firstly, what actually is a pendulum? So a pendulum is basically a weight suspended on a string or chain. And the idea is that it can swing freely using gravity, meaning that it should also always find its center going down towards the center of the earth in terms of gravity, but it can also be influenced easily because it's so free on the chain. It can be influenced easily by other entities and energies, which is where you receive your guidance and answers from. That's the theory behind how pendulum dowsing actually works. So pendulum dowsing is the act of using a pendulum, holding a pendulum in the air, letting it swing freely, and then using it to get answers from things outside yourself. Now, this is something where you really need to be careful about what or who you are using to get your answers from. In exactly the same way as with channeling, you can very easily receive the wrong type of messages, the wrong form of messages from the wrong people or entities. So with pendulum dowsing, it's exactly the same. You need to be very clear about who and what you want to get answers from. For example, you might want to get answers from your higher self, your spirit guides, your, past lives or ancestors, different energies. It really varies massively, and there's different types of answers that you'll get from different types of entities or people. So what can you actually ask a pendulum? Well, to be honest, not a lot. Okay, you're very limited in terms of what questions you can ask, because the only things you can really get an answer for is either yes, no, or a kind of in the middle answer like I don't know, or rephrase the question. Because obviously with a pendulum, as you swing it round or as you hold it, there's really only a few directions it can go. And you have to also limit yourself to what's the most likely. For example, it's just going to swing either forward and back, left or right, or it's just going to kind of stay there or go in a circle. So because there's only three outcomes, it can't go up or down. It's only going to go in one of the sideways directions. You really, to get a more accurate answer from the pendulum, are limited to asking yes or no questions, because what you will do when you set the pendulum up is you will say, right, I'm going to assign a value of yes to if it swings forward or backwards, and then if the pendulum swings left or right, that means no. We'll get onto that in a second, okay? Firstly, in order to prepare for this, the basics of what you should do to the pendulum to prepare do kind of vary. A lot of different people will say different things about how you should prepare the energy of the pendant, because remember certainly in this case, it's a crystal, okay? It's an amethyst crystal, and people say that with crystals, you should really cleanse them because they can absorb and hold onto energies quite easily. They can also transmit frequencies or energies. So in order to cleanse a crystal, and I assume that's what you're using as a pendulum, you should really clean or cleanse the crystal using either moonlight, sunlight, or salt water, that kind of thing. Okay, you can kind of look into it more yourself. I don't want to go too much into the pros and cons of each one on this video. But let's just say, for example, you pick the moon. So you would leave the crystal out in the moonlight, and then when it's the next day, the next morning, the pendulum or the crystal would be ready. All right, so how can you actually use a pendulum to, using pendulum dowsing, actually receive answers to questions or get guidance? The first step is firstly, before you even touch your pendulum, you need to completely cleanse your mind. You need to meditate, get rid of all the annoying thoughts or anxious worries you have in your head. Relax your muscles, relax your mind, and ideally meditate for about 5 or 10 minutes. You can actually add this into your morning routine, for example, meditate and then use the pendulum, or you can just meditate, clearing your mind, and then focus on your intention. So in this case, you want to get answers. So you would focus your intention on saying, I open myself up to answers that are in my highest good, for example, right? You can phrase things in your own words, of course. Okay, so the next step, and by the way, this is assuming that you've already prepared your pendulum, you've already cleansed it, it's already ready to go, and you already have the pendulum on a string or on a chain, okay? The next step is you would assign answer targets to each movement of the pendulum. And like I said, really the main movements is forward and back, left and right, and then nothing or in a circle. So the easiest way of doing this, and this is the way I would suggest you do, is as you hold the pendulum in front of you, you say, right, if it swings forward and back, that means yes. If it swings left and right, that means no. And if it does nothing or just goes in a circle, that's either I don't know, or rephrase the question, or maybe. All right, so the next step, so you've done that, you've decided which movement corresponds to which answer, is to just arch your wrist slightly, just hold the pendulum in front of you, just like this, and focus all of your intention and energies on, firstly, keeping your body as still as possible. You want all of your muscles to be completely relaxed. And then next, focus on asking the question. So you would direct your energy into the pendulum and say, should I, and remember, it has to be yes or no questions. You could say things like, should I leave my job? Should I don't know, text this person, right? Whatever your questions are, you would just say should, could, or would questions, and then you will hopefully get a yes or a no answer. Now, what you can do, especially if you're new to this, is you can actually kind of test the pendulum. So you can, for example, hold it in front of you and just ask it something that you know the answer to. Ask it something like, is my name so-and-so? Right? Am I sitting down right now? And then hopefully you will actually receive a signal, hopefully the right one. And then once you've done that, you know that things are kind of working as they should, and you can move on to the next step. Okay, next, remember this is before you've actually asked your first question. You need to program the source. So you need to actually focus your energy on the pendulum and say, I would like answers from, and then obviously wherever you would like answers from. Maybe it's your higher self, maybe it's a specific person, entity, energy, historical figure, whatever, right? And then you, of course, ask your question and wait for the answer. It's helpful to keep like a journal if you want to write these things down. Okay, so how does pendulum dowsing actually give you answers? What's the mechanics behind it? How does it work? Well, you've got to remember that at the holographic level of reality, everything is connected. So when you understand that nothing is separate, it's very easy to understand how something, an energy, person, entity, can influence and interlink with your energy, especially if you directly ask for it, especially if you put your intention into saying, I would like an answer from you specifically. Because there's no separation, because these things are all interconnected, it's very easy at the holographic level for these things to happen. Now, the reason we use a pendulum is because when you hold a free hanging pendulum, there's really not much physical limitations on that pendulum. It can freely swing, and that's why it's easier for subtle energies to manipulate it. Compared to, say, if you said, here is my chair, move the chair forward if it's a yes answer. Now, of course, it's going to take an incredible amount of emotional energy for the entity to actually move the chair. Now, of course, it does happen. Things like poltergeists and demons or, ghosts, they do move objects in that way, especially big objects in some cases. But it requires a lot of energy. So that's why a pendulum is used, because there's so little energy required to actually move it that, almost any entity can do it. Now, remember to trust your intuition. If you do want to make this work a bit easier, then I would highly recommend you to raise your vibrations in general. We have things like the Superhuman Optimization System. This is a very powerful program that will show you how to become a kind of like an optimized superhuman, raise your vibrations, be able to manifest everything you would like. And the page that I suggested for that superhuman program, it actually gives you a free video training that explains how all of this works at the holographic level and how you can use it today. And also remember not to rely 100% on a pendulum for answers, in exactly the same way as you should not rely 100% on your spirit guides or channeling or even any kind of outside information. You should really just firstly trust your intuition and inner knowing, and then use these things as kind of different perspectives. The pendulum, for example, a psychic reading, they're just ideas and perspectives. They're not set in stone. They don't have to happen exactly that way. All the psychic really is doing, well, firstly, there's two things that a psychic will do. They will either be wasting your time, essentially, because they're not connected to the proper channel, or if they are good psychics, if they're actually connected to different things, then they will give you the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome in the holographic waveform level. That doesn't mean that has to happen. It just means that if nothing else changes, or if things go as they are going now, if the momentum carries on, this is what's most likely to happen. That doesn't mean it has to happen. So with pendulum answers as well, take it with a pinch of salt. Don't 100% trust and believe it if your intuition is saying something completely different.